Hello, and welcome to our second quarter webinar. My name is Nick Breul. I'm a senior project manager with the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund and Museum. And I'm presenting data today that we do every quarter, tracking law enforcement fatalities and issues around law enforcement traffic safety. We're going to do a couple things today. Rio Nelson, who is our partner at NHTSA, will not be joining us today, but we do have, and I'll introduce him again in a minute, but we have Captain Peter Cimbal of the Chesterfield, Virginia Police Department, who's going to join us after I give you some data and information. And he's going to walk us through his agency's officer traffic safety programs and what they're doing to reduce crashes and make it safer for their officers. I want to tell you a little bit about what's going on at the Memorial Fund, some of the things that's happening. We'll discuss where we are for the second quarter, and it's not going to be just the second quarter that I take you through. It's really going to be year to date. We do these quarterly reports, but as I go through the quarters, I think it's important to just really look at the overall data for where we are, comparing where we are now with the previous year. And if I have any other analysis that carries us over that, I'll certainly share that. So we did have the candlelight vigil, which was on May 13th, 2023. This is a photograph from that actual vigil that occurred just this last couple months ago. And in that, this is where we read the names of all of the fallen officers. So 556 names were read at this vigil. And of course, 556 names were added to the National Law Enforcement Memorial Wall. Within that 556, 224 of those line of duty deaths occurred in 2022. And I would just remind you all that the numbers come from historic cases, and historic can mean a case from 2021 that hadn't made it through but was finally put through in 2022. Historic cases in that we do have a research department, and they do an excellent job in identifying older cases, back to the 1800s. And there are lots of amateur historians and sleuths who discover that there was a deputy sheriff killed back in 18 whatever, whose name was never added to the wall. And we would get all that information, and it gets presented to a committee. The other thing in terms of historic cases are 9/11 related illnesses. We are still seeing a number of officers who are at Ground Zero, Shanksville, and the Pentagon who are exposed to toxins, who are suffering from incidences of cancer. And unfortunately, those cases continue to come in. So that kind of gives you an idea of where those numbers come from. But I would say, in my experience, 556 is a high number. Of course, the largest contributor to that was COVID, as well as the year before. COVID was a big contributor to that. I do want to point out our mid-year report is out. Today, I'm going to talk about traffic safety numbers, but the mid-year report will bring you up to date where we are in 2023 with line of duty deaths. I would just tell you briefly that we're 66% down overall compared to where we were at this time in 2022. And that's, I think, not just the first bit of good news. Firearms related cases, line of duty deaths, are down 24% within the first half of the year. Again, I think in this profession, we all take what good news we can. And I'm not saying that that's a trend. I'll talk a little bit more about that kind of stuff. But I think those are important numbers to look at, and maybe a little encouraging. There have also only been 2 COVID deaths that have been reported this year. There may have been a third that came in that I saw on the Officer Down Memorial page the other day. But so far, we've got 2 confirmed COVID cases. I've got a couple of things on the presentation today that are really just kind of fun. I'm always sort of doom and gloom with the numbers, and we're always talking about kind of negative things. And one of the things I wanted to share with you guys, Wayland is a board member and a sponsor of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. And back in May, they had a number of our staff down at the Charlotte Motor Speedway to see this vehicle that they had created with our logo on the hood. And you see there's a move over and slow down symbol on the rear of that Chevy NASCAR, which I think is kind of funny. And obviously we're working with our partners at NHTSA. And so they have that NHTSA logo for slow down and move over. But I do want you to take a look at that back, they call it deck or deck lid. And that has all 556 names that I just mentioned to you written out on the back of that deck lid. And we have, they did this last year as well. We have that deck lid in the memorial, in the museum, excuse me. And I'm not sure if we'll get this deck lid again this year, but really great gesture from Whalen, and really great acknowledgement to the sacrifice of the men and women in law enforcement. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. You've heard me mention probably more times than you care to know the traffic safety summits. And I say summits because we've had two now. This is a photo from one of the sessions at the Traffic Safety Summit we held in Lincoln, Maryland. This was a very well attended summit, but this summit then took what we did at the Memorial Fund in July of 2022 and pushed it out to get an even wider net of participants. So we had members from towing and recovery, the fire service, DOT. We also had our partners from CDC, NIOSH, NHTSA, Federal Highway, National Law Enforcement Roadway Safety Program, and a host of others, even a prosecutor to come and talk about some of the issues that occur when trying to prosecute not just an impaired driver fatality, but a struck by fatality that may have involved a texting while driving suspect. So it really was an open forum with regard to the number of different people and number of different participants providing information. One of the things, if you can look down at this slide, you see there's a hard hat on there and there's a police hat. There were vendors there who had safety, new safety equipment. You've heard me talk about lighting equipment to make it easier to see, lighted cordoned off areas at night to create that greater awareness of any lane taper. But one of the things that the vendors were looking at were helmets and the design of helmets to protect people during struck by crashes, or not just struck by crashes, but predominantly struck by crashes, and making sure that a construction helmet doesn't really provide that cover. And of course, it'll pop off the minute you get hit. Certainly a trooper hat or a law enforcement hat isn't going to protect your noggin. And some of the fire helmets aren't necessarily sufficient for that. So there are people looking at helmets and making sure the helmets come down. They allow you to hear, but they protect your temples and can better protect your head while you're out there on the roadway. I know how difficult it was to get scooter officers to wear their helmets. So I'm sure it's going to be kind of a battle to maybe get officers to want to buy into putting on roadway safety helmets when they get out on the roadway. This is an old slide. You've seen it, but I put it up there because the core concerns that we talked about in that Traffic Safety Summit last May were things that echoed what we did in our safety summit. And I have those little buttons there. Seatbelts is still a big issue. Tire deflation devices, we're going to talk about those. And then you're going to hear, I'm going to mention right side approaches, but I think you're also going to hear from Captain Cimbal on right side approaches and how important it is that that continues to be adopted, because it's, I think, clearly making a difference. So again, I said I was going to put a little bit of whimsy in here, and I'm an old school guy. You know, I retired in 2012, and for almost all of my career in the police department, I had a version of a Crown Vic from '89 all the way through to 2011. I took this picture in the Lincoln, Maryland Traffic Safety Summit because this cruiser was parked out there, and it is in great condition. It's a Baltimore County PD cruiser. And they stopped making this car back in 2011. And I just thought it was funny that, and I've seen other jurisdictions hang on to them. These, to me, were very good police cars. And here we have an agency that's gotten at least 12 years out of this car, which is, I think, as you all may know, very unusual, particularly for a road vehicle to last more than 4 or 5 years, to say nothing of 12 years. And I'm not sure what year model that is. I'm pretty sure Ford stopped making them in 2011. But this is I was kind of shocked to see this still in service. There's still a few around, but I just thought it was a really kind of funny thing to put up there to see that folks are still hanging on to those Crown Victorias, which I also thought were good vehicles. So I talked about the mid-year report, and I think there is good news, and it's nice to report good news. As I say, I don't really care to report the doom and gloom. For years, we've been reporting increases, and if you recall, if you were attended the first quarter webinar, we went through the entire month of January in 2023 without a law enforcement traffic-related fatality. It's the first time that's ever happened in the 8 years that I've been doing this for the Memorial Fund. So I think it's important that we look at our good news, and a trend is not made through 6 months of data, but we're seeing some, as I said, I think some positive, I would hope positive results of all the efforts that all of us, those of us participating on this webinar as well, included. And I guess what I'm trying to say is maybe the message is getting through. It might be too early to say that. I'm not trying to ring any bells, but I certainly think that the numbers are encouraging. So here are the numbers now. And again, you have to remember COVID kind of driving that larger number going down. The bottom number of other causes is significantly lower due to COVID. Just so people understand, and I mention this each time, other includes things like stabbings, beatings, strangulation. I don't know if any of you heard, there was a deputy who was strangled in a Sally Port by a suspect and killed the other day, as that suspect was being escorted by that deputy from a hospital, and the suspect was trying to escape. So those get included in that. If people need more detailed breakouts for those specific types of line of duty deaths, we can of course provide those. Firearms related down 22%, and then of course traffic, we're down 61%. That's a pretty significant number, even though we are dealing with, I understand we're dealing with small numbers, and when there's a small change, the percentage can increase seems larger, but again, 61%, I think that's something we should pay attention to. This year we've had 12 crashes, and 9 of those are automobile crashes. 2 are struck-bys, and 1 is a motorcycle crash. So let's quickly look at what at this time in 2022, we had 18 vehicle crashes. 15 were auto collisions with other vehicles, and 3 were single vehicle crashes. You probably have seen those numbers before that I've broken out over last year as to what they were doing when they were in the vehicle crashes. This year, we've, as I said, had 9 crashes, and they break out as follows. One of the officers was on patrol when he was struck, and that was a horrific crash in Kansas City. It was a T-bone crash at an intersection. I believe that officer's canine was killed, as well as a pedestrian on the roadway was killed when his unit was driven back up onto the sidewalk by a teenager speeding. One was on an administrative run, and again, I'll remind everybody, an administrative run can be anything from responding to and from training, transporting evidence, or responding to an assignment, doing things that are not directed or specifically on patrol. One was killed while conducting an escort, and this was not a motorcycle escort. This was a wide load escort being conducted by I believe a deputy in a pickup truck, and he was involved in a head-on collision while he was escorting that wide load. 4 were responding to back up other officers. So they were expediting, meaning lights and sirens, to back up their fellow officers. And then 1 was killed while engaged in a pursuit. Again, 9 compared to 18, that's a 50% reduction in vehicle crashes as we break out each type of incident in this data. Again, these are to me encouraging numbers. I'm not, again, getting too excited about it, but I'm encouraged. So as we focused on struck-bys the last couple of years, and with good reason. And as you look at the larger group of struck-bys for first responders, this is taken from respondersafety.com. You'll hear me mention them again. And they do a lot of great work and put up a lot of great data. The last time I checked, there were 17 cases of first responders, and that is fire, police, EMS, and towing and recovery. And I think they even capture construction workers and maybe DOT. There are 17 cases nationally of struck by fatalities, and that's compared to 28 at this time last year, 39% lower than it was at this time last year. So you can go to respondersafety.com and get there. I think you have to download it, but they have a spreadsheet of all the different types of cases, and it's by year. So as we're talking about struck by crashes, and again, I know you've seen this slide before if you've been on the webinar during the first quarter. 11 at this time last year, we had 11 struck by crashes. 2 were the troopers in Pennsylvania who were struck while trying to remove the man on the pedestrian off of the elevated roadway. 1 was another trooper struck by a fellow trooper who was responding to back him up. 1 was removing a ladder from the roadway, and that's one of the common themes in struck-bys are people trying to remove debris. 4 were struck while directing or diverting traffic. And I want to take a minute to talk about one of the presentations we had at the Linthicum, Maryland Traffic Safety Summit. And that was, I believe, was a member of the Irving Fire Department, Irving, Texas. And there was a vendor there as well. And what they're doing is they're using refurbished fire trucks to use as blocker vehicles. And I don't think they're all necessary fire trucks either. They could be like big sand trucks. But in this instance, they were using refurbished fire trucks to be out there and block and protect everyone downstream the way you would with, and we've seen ladder trucks have been used for this purpose. And if you recall, in 2016 or 2017, Irving, Texas had a ladder truck completely wiped out by a semi-tractor trailer as it had positioned itself to protect the Irving PD officers who were downstream handling a crash. And if you're not familiar with it, ladder trucks, it takes 4 years to get a new ladder truck on order, and they're almost $1 million each. So now you've got a way to have some equipment that could get wiped out and not wipe out a municipality's ability to fight fire and rescue people. And that's one of the things that we're trying to capture when we want struck by data and reporting near misses, property damage, injuries, and fatalities is to also get an idea of the cost, apart from the human cost, but the material cost of some of these crashes that leave municipalities and police agencies with fewer vehicles, right? And without certain equipment that they desperately need. So as we look at 2022 and compare it to 2023 in this time frame, which really is year to date, not just the second quarter, as I mentioned, there were 11 struck by crashes. There have been 2 struck by crashes so far this year in 2023. But unfortunately, we have to talk a little more seriously about the 2 struck crashes that did occur. And I want to say right from the outset that this is in no way trying to impugn the Indiana State Police or these 2 troopers. Preliminarily, the information is that our 2 struck by crashes involve separate incidents of troopers deploying tire deflation devices and being killed. And unfortunately, they're both from the same agency. And once again, that is not to say anything about the Indiana State Police, but it is a cautionary tale that means, and we had, prior to these 2 cases, the Memorial Fund, we have been looking at tire deflation devices. And when I say looking at them, we started pulling 10 years of data. And we're going into those cases with everything that was submitted to figure out exactly what happened in those cases. Are there similar circumstances that are perhaps driving some of these instances? And what can we do to better protect officers or to better train officers to prevent these types of fatalities and injuries occurring? And this is not to say we should throw out tire deflation devices. I do know some chiefs who have decided to just simply take them out of the cars and not use them. I'm not one for throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think there's a time and a place to use these devices to stop pursuits, but clearly we have a problem, and we've got to look at what officers are doing and what circumstances under which they are using these devices. And one of the things that we've been doing is, apart from reviewing our reports, we've been going and checking open sources. And there's videos from below 100, and there's some pretty horrific videos on the internet that are tough to watch. But in looking at those, you'll see in some of those circumstances, I know of several that I looked at where officers are pretty much running out in front of the car, trying to throw those deflation devices directly under the wheels of the car. Some of them seem to be hastily deployed. Some of the times they're not retracted. And unfortunately, there's a video that's out that's pretty recent where I think 4 of the pursuing vehicles all ended up running over the stop sticks. Now, of course, when you run over those devices that leave something in the tire to bleed the air out, you're still puncturing tires with what is left. And several of the pursuing vehicles were, of course, then disabled. So, and there's another video of one successful spike on a vehicle, but unfortunately the suspect behind the wheel then loses control and slams into a tractor trailer. So I think there's a lot of work that may need to be done, and perhaps another look at how these devices are being deployed, and that we make sure we work to do what we say we're going to do, which is to keep names off the wall. So last couple things I'll leave you with. We always look, NHTSA is our cooperative partner in this effort. We always look at where these crashes are occurring. If you've seen presentations before or followed any of the analysis I do, Region 6 and Region 4 are usually have the highest number of fatal police crashes. That hasn't changed even with the small number of crashes, relatively small number of crashes we have this year. Region 6 and 4 are still the agencies that have the most incidences. And I mentioned responder safety. I put this up because I really want folks to use this. If you can see my cursor, let me see if I can get my cursor on here. Right up here, if you see where my cursor is, struck by near miss, if you click on that, when you go onto respondersafety.com, it'll take you to this report form. It takes about 10 minutes to fill it out. Share this with everybody so that Federal Highway, Responder Safety, and NHTSA can all get the data they need to really wrap their arms around what's happening in terms of secondary and struck by crashes on our nation's highways. And data and gathering data was one of the key components out of the Lithicum Traffic Safety Summit. We heard from a lot of people there, including survivors. But as we went through the day, the issue of gathering the important data so that we have actionable numbers and really understand what the problem is, everyone agreed that that was critical. So I just want to remind people of that. So we're going to move on to the next portion. This is me, and we can put this back up at the end if anybody misses it. That's my cell phone. So if you have a burning question, please call me and leave a message if I don't answer the phone. If you don't leave a message, I probably won't call you back. This is my email. Usually we offer the flash drives at this point to remind anybody that we have the flash drives that have all that material on it. We are in the process of updating those. We are in the process of making a new video to add to that repertoire of videos we have that you can share at roll calls. So we are getting ready to upgrade all of that. So hopefully by October, and hopefully some of you, if you're in law enforcement, may be at IACP, we'll be there in October. And of course, I'll be at the National Sheriff's winter meetings. So there's an opportunity for the new flash drives to get distributed there. But once they're ready, we'll let you guys know, and you can email me and we'll send them out to you. So next up is Captain Peter Cimbal of the Chesterfield, Virginia Police Department. We've invited him to come talk to us about what they're doing down in Chesterfield, Virginia to improve officer traffic safety. And you guys are going to be the first group to know. I've been given permission to let the cat out of the bag. They won the National Officer Safety and Wellness Award for officer traffic safety. So congratulations to that agency. I'm going to turn it over to Captain Cimbal. I'll let him introduce himself and give us a little background on him. And then he's got a presentation on what it is they focus on down there in Chesterfield, Virginia.
Well, thank you, Nick. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody here this afternoon, and thank you again for notifying us of that honor of being recognized by Destination Zero as one of the award winners, especially for traffic safety. Again, to the group that's in attendance here today, my name is Pete Cimbal. I am a captain with the Chesterfield County Police Department in Virginia. I've been employed here for the last almost 26 years. I'll come up on 26 years this October. And I've been in a supervisory capacity since 2006. During that time, I've had a lot of different field assignments, mostly through operations and into investigations. But currently, with my assignment in special operations and previously in management services, I had a lot to do with traffic safety and the purchasing of vehicles and equipment. So with that said, we're going to get started here. I'm going to share my screen and we'll begin talking about the presentation today. Again, we're at the Chesterfield County Police Department located in Chesterfield, Virginia. And a little bit about the county. Chesterfield County is located in central Virginia. We're part of the greater Richmond region. We are a 437 square mile locality with a population of just under 371,000 people. This is the fourth largest locality in Virginia based on population, and with a little over 8,000 roadway miles. We have 3 interstate highways, I-95, 295, and 895, along with 3 non-interstate restricted access highways. And one of the statistics I really found interesting when I was putting a lot of this information together and looking at our officer safety, when it comes to vehicles, is the Virginia Department of Transportation Daily Vehicle Miles Traveled report indicates that Chesterfield County roadways, our citizens, community members, people that are just traversing the county, travel 8.5 million miles per day on our roadways. Now, what that says to me is that there is a lot of opportunity for vehicle crashes to occur, for officers to be responding to those crashes, and potentially have some type of an incident. Additionally, about the police department itself, our organization has 558 authorized sworn officers. Total full-time positions, including our professional support staff, is 696. And we typically are very fortunate to operate in today's environment between 95 and 97% of staffing capacity. So we normally run at very low vacancy rates, which again is a tribute to the hard work put in by our recruiters and other people on our staff. And additionally, we respond to 230,000 plus calls for service annually. But why we're here today, really Destination Zero, talking about our focus on keeping our people safe. The command staff for this organization, starting with our chief, focuses significant investment in our people. The wellness of our officers, the equipment that we're using, wanting to making sure that we have top-notch equipment and that everything's safe, and the training that we provide. We are striving to become a leader in training law enforcement officers in our region, the state, and throughout the country. So Chesterfield County Police are traffic safety for our officers. We have a take-home vehicle fleet. All 558 sworn officers have their own vehicles. Over 350 of these vehicles are marked high visibility patrol cars. Since 2019, we have been using a 54-inch Legacy Wecan Duo LED light bar, along with Whelan's CENTCOM core systems. Our unmarked patrol cars also use a combination of Whelan Tracer LEDs, front and rear inner edge light bars, and that same CENTCOM core operating system. We're going to talk a little bit more about those operating systems later on as we get into things, because they are fairly important. All of our vehicles, also you can see on the picture here from the decals, we use a 3M reflective sheeting on both sides of our cars, along with a white sheeting on the rear bumper, as well as on the inside edges of all of our doors and the trunks, so that when an officer's getting out of their vehicle, there's some reflective striping right there on the inside edge of the doors. But we also have to remind that no amount of training can prevent all police crashes. So we are constantly looking at how do we reduce these dangers. When you look at the pictures that you see on the screen, the first thing that comes to mind is that for some reason, one of those Crown Victorias that Nick mentioned earlier in his presentation is sitting upside down on its hood. So this officer, if you want to talk about how we train people, this officer was driving to assist another officer who was in a foot chase. He was not familiar with the roadway that he was driving on, and he also outdrove his vehicle's ability to maintain traction on that roadway, and ended up upside down on a separate road from the one that he actually had been driving on. The next picture you see, again, is an older Crown Vic. However, this vehicle was third in line of police vehicles when sometimes we talk about multiple officers responding to calls for service. This third vehicle traveling through an intersection trying to clear it was broadsided by a drunk driver who claims that he never, of course, he's intoxicated and claims that he never saw him coming. The vehicle down on the lower left is a newer SUV. I believe that happens to actually be a 2021 SUV that a supervisor had responded to assist an officer on a traffic stop on a highway and was rear-ended by a distracted driver who hit that vehicle so hard he pushed him about 50 feet forward into the first police vehicle and then into the vehicle that had been stopped on the side of the road. A little bit about that. The reason there were no significant injuries in that was that vehicle positioning far enough back that if both vehicles were hit, it was going to cause some cushion for some of that, transfer of force and energy to kind of dissipate over that distance. That center vehicle you see is another vehicle, just a photograph of one that was trying to do an intersection clearing during the daytime, where the motorist actually told us that they never saw the police vehicle coming. And then that last picture on the bottom right, I can speak to this one personally because that is my vehicle. When I was struck by a drunk driver this past New Year's Eve, that is my unmarked police vehicle. And one of the things with that crash that we'll talk about a little bit later is the reason that crash was not as bad as it could have been. I was facing a head-on, dead center DUI driver traveling the wrong way in my lane of travel. And because of our crash avoidance training, I was able to get that vehicle moved just enough to offset the energy transfer in that collision and walk away from it, actually. So a couple of other things we do here in Chesterfield County, annual high-speed and precision driver training. So the picture that you see there is our 1.4-mile driving course. This course does allow us to get up to speeds over 100 miles an hour and presents officers with various road surface conditions, stoplights, railroad crossings, different types of intersections. There's also, when you look at the roadway surfaces, this track has concrete service, asphalt service, gravel, and off-road dirt sections to it. If you think about police issued equipment, and I've heard it mentioned before, and some of this information you may know, but the most utilized piece of equipment that we provide our officers is their vehicles. They use it every single day. Yet most agencies don't train annually for pursuit or precision driving. Yet those same states, as most, mandate firearms training, defensive tactics training, and there are other types of training courses, but really don't focus on the driver training. I can say that I've been fortunate in my 25 plus years to never have had to discharge my service weapon, in an act of defense of another. And in that case, but yet I've responded hundreds of times in emergency driving situations and conditions without that required training. It's only in about the last 5 or 6 years that Chesterfield County has begun to do annual driver training. Additionally, at this facility, we've started to do some SUV specific training. Like most agencies across the country, with the vehicle manufacturers stopping to make a lot of sedans, we're switching to an all SUV fleet, yet didn't really have developed an SUV driving course. So we worked on that over this last year and developed an SUV specific precision driver course and high-speed driver course, where we're teaching our officers about the differences in the center of gravity in these SUVs, which is different than it was in the sedans, along with the technology that you find in a lot of these all-wheel drive SUVs, which prevents a lot of skidding, skid control, off-road recovery, as well as visibility. Many people aren't thinking about the visibility factor in these vehicles. Our old square box vehicles that many of us used to have back in the 90s and into the early 2000s, where you knew where the corners of your vehicles were. That's all gone now with these rounded edges and smaller windows. So we're doing a lot to try to teach officers to be aware of the size of their vehicle and where they are in relation to objects. The other thing, the visual collision avoidance training that we do this at speeds of up to about 60 miles an hour on this track, whereas an officer approaches basically a checkpoint where there's an officer there with a 3-lane indicator that they flip a chart, and based on that visual flip chart, the officer driving the car has to make a determination of which cone travel lane to go into, and either to stop, proceed through, slow and use caution, etc. So it's all made at the last second, and the officer can't make that decision of which lane to choose until they visually see the chart. Improved traffic stops. So the video that you guys are about to see here, when you're looking at passenger side or away from traffic approaches, I know a lot of people will say it's right-hand approach, but I just like to say it's either passenger or away from traffic, because a lot of vehicles on an interstate restricted access highway could be pulling over to the left side of the road versus the right. But this is probably the most impactful video that I have ever seen for making that right-hand side or passenger side approach. And I don't think this officer would be here today if they had been on the driver's side. So let's take a look at it. You'll see the officer look up momentarily. Now, when I went through this video frame by frame, and I was able to look at when that officer looked up and was able to kind of hear that car that had lost control was coming at him, by the time he made his reaction to get to the rear of the vehicle and try to get out of the way, it's my opinion, had he been on the driver's side, that odds are he would not be with us today. So very fortunate situation. And again, just reinforcing, if there are law enforcement folks in the attendance here today that are not teaching their officers about passenger side or right side approach, it is something you may want to reconsider. The other thing that we have to do to make sure that we're keeping our officers safe is the testing and evaluation of equipment, how new vehicles handle. You know, this right here is my trip down to the Ford police vehicle demo day in Charlotte. And this is just driving a Ford EcoBoost SUV. And what here we were really looking for is the differences in engines on the vehicles, looking at fuel economy and responsiveness, and also trying to get a feel for how they handled versus the sedans when they decided to switch to the SUV. And there are definitely some differences as far as acceleration and handling and how these vehicles are able to corner, which is actually really impressive. Next, we try to focus a lot also on our traffic stop and crash scene awareness. Where are our vehicles going to be positioned when making a traffic stop, where those backup or secondary responding officers are going to be. We try to follow as much as possible, as much as roadways allow, the TIM training for the traffic incident management positioning when possible, whether that's right hand or left hand blocking. And I know that Nick had mentioned some of the fire trucks and how they could be hit by tractor trailers. And in this picture, you can see two Chesterfield County fire apparatus, on Interstate I-95. And he is right. If that back engine ends up getting hit by a tractor trailer, I know that at least for our locality, that's about a $700,000 or $800,000 piece of equipment that's out of service. Additionally, we want to make sure that we're wearing our reflective and safety vests when on the road or out where moving traffic is. Drive to arrive. Can't stress this enough. Being an agency that has lost officers due to vehicle crashes, we're always striving to keep our officers safe. We teach below 100. We teach the Sears Project. We look to recognize officers with safe driving awards or, safety awards for wearing their seatbelts. But we also do a lot of speed monitoring of our vehicles, using GPS and ADL technology. I know a lot of people think that that's kind of Big Brother looking out, but the way our vehicles are set up, that when you hit a speed of 80 miles an hour or higher, your ping rate within our emergency communications center begins to change. So our dispatchers down there can see that your vehicle is traveling over 80 miles an hour, and rather than having a 10 to 15 second ping rate refresh, the second you hit 80 miles an hour, you're now ping rate refreshing on their screens at about every 3 seconds. So it's a little bit more just to be aware, make sure that people are aware that officers might be traveling at high speed. Could be completely justified, why they're traveling in that speed, but we want officers to know that they need to justify that speed. And now one of the big reasons that I'm here today too is to start to talk about the importance of emergency vehicle lighting, trying to figure out what color schemes are you using, what kind of equipment do you use. This is really where we have begun to make some changes in Chesterfield County over the last 4 years. I would definitely like to encourage any law enforcement here that might be using a single color to really start to look at considering switching to multicolor or dual color type light bars, because it really does impact the safety of your officers and visual awareness for oncoming motorists, which I'll talk a lot about here just in a moment. But I'd also encourage anyone to go back to your agencies, look at that equipment that you have in your cars and ask yourself the simple question, are you using that equipment to its fullest capability? Do you know and are you aware of what it can or can't do? So multicolor importance. Traditionally, police vehicles in Virginia would only had blue lights on them. A lot of sheriff's office, Chesterfield County, when I was initially hired, we were just solid blue. The Virginia State Police, also solid blue. But in Chesterfield in the late 2000s, we began to change to a color combination of red and blue. The reason why is even in the mid 2000s, some studies were coming out that had stated that having red and blue lights together improved motorist awareness. Now, back then, those studies really tended to focus on what people perceive or how they feel about a color. And when a lot of motorists were surveyed, they began to say that they associated red lights with emergency vehicles. But then a lot of other motorists would say that blue lights, because the use of blue lights throughout the country varies state by state, that if you think about northeastern states, if anyone here is from the Northeast, you start to think about volunteer firefighters, volunteer people responding to the firehouse to go get the apparatus. Not so much an emergency vehicle, but just somebody who's trying to, get to a location to get that equipment. So by having all blue lights, people traveling up and down the interstates coming through, some motorists weren't exactly sure what type of vehicle it was that was on the side of the road. So in 2007, we began to convert over to the red and blue combination, and that would remain unchanged for 12 years. 2019 is when we began to change again. We started to ask a lot of questions about what our equipment was capable of. When I was promoted to captain in 2019, I was assigned to our management services division, which included our police vehicle fleet. Somewhat similar to what I mentioned earlier, I was more operational or investigation supervisor throughout my career, and I could admit that I had very little knowledge about what it took to build a police car, or what all the equipment could do, or how those installations took place. So I began to try to educate myself on our equipment, because this is a significant portion of most departments' budgets. Going into buying this type of equipment, I wanted to make sure that we were getting the best equipment that we could and that we were using it to its fullest potential. Having been to a few product demos and seeing some of the abilities of police vehicles, I began to ask some more questions about why don't we use things to its fullest potential. And when I asked about our specific equipment, I did find out that we were not using it to its fullest potential. We have used these Wayland CENTCOM or core systems, or some variant of that Wayland system, going back to probably about 2010, and we've never really been using it fully. For our agency, in-house installation and text and vehicle builds, we pretty much just used the status quo. If the red and blue lights turned on, then it was good to go. So beginning to include smarter people in those conversations than myself and asking what our best practices were, we began to make some changes. And that's where the lighting studies come in. I really knew that I was going to have to sell this to our command staff and to our entire organization to reflect some changes and get away from the "we've always done it this way" mentality. So looking at lighting studies, Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, the Emergency Responder Safety Institute, which I believe Nick has mentioned here a few times, the Office of Justice Programs, LE Vehicle Lighting and Reflectivity Studies. These are three great locations that you can go to on the internet. You can see information that they have. They are frequently updating various studies that they're doing. And I found when I was looking through these that all of the studies have great information in them, and they kind of touch on each other. I didn't know much about the range of visible light as far as what that light wavelength spectrum is, but I did learn, and it makes a lot of sense, is that red tends to be on the high end of that light spectrum and blue is on the low end of that light spectrum. So agencies that are using a combination of red and blue lights are covering the widest possible range of visible light to the human eye with that oncoming traffic, as well as learning that amber or yellow, which is also as the most visible wavelength of light, is right in the middle. So instantly hearing that, red is at one end, blue is on the other, and amber's in the middle, I began to start to look at police agencies or what the benefits would be of those that use all three colors. I didn't find a study that could say that there was a significant difference in the distance at which light is perceived. And some of them mention when you go in and you read them that it tends to be about 600 meters is when the human eye begins to pick up that light off in the distance. And there's really no difference between that's red or blue. However, red tends to be more visible during the nighttime hours, and blue is more visible during the daytime. There was some conversation about blue lights only tending to have a little bit of a washout effect at night, especially if it tends to be a little hazy or there's some fog in the air, that you can lose that shadow or that silhouette of officers when they're opening up doors to get out of their cars. So that was something important we looked at. And with that also came a looking at flash patterns. We began to look at that constant, real quick flash pattern that a lot of police agencies have, and realizing that that is great for when you're driving down the road and you're just trying to grab somebody's quick attention to maybe move out of the way. But once you're on scene, a lot of vehicles that are pulled together, you can begin to lose the silhouettes of those officers because it kind of creates a light chaos on your scene. So we began to look at what could we do to slow down our light flash patterns. So armed with just enough information to be dangerous, we directed some changes. What types of changes did we make after the research? Knowing that we were already red and blue, we added amber. We added amber to the rear of our light bars so that there will always be amber reflected in there. We turned on the intersection clearing function of the Wayland core system. This was a function that we've been paying for years and we're never using. Basically, we program one of the buttons on that core system to allow the officer to hit it, and all of the lights will go to a very fast flash pattern to include adding some of the white crime scene lighting strobes into a really quick 6-second burst of flash to help draw attention to a vehicle as you're clearing an intersection. We programmed in the traffic advisory function into all of our light bars since 2019. Therefore, the officers can use that amber or red traffic advisory function, to either direct a vehicle to go left or right. We turned on the open door vehicle functions, which is basically the door button in the Wayland core system, which when a police officer now goes and opens up that door to their vehicle, the lights on that side of the vehicle momentarily turn off so that the officers don't get loosed in that washout of the light, and their silhouette doesn't get lost by potential oncoming drivers. We also changed to a single bottom of the bumper reflective strip away from older higher mount strips. And this was really because one of the studies also showed that a single thin strip of reflective striping along the bottom of the rear of the vehicle helps oncoming motorists to get an idea of the width of that vehicle, as well as not interfere with their vision with the lights on. We turned on a braking function for officer awareness. You got multiple vehicles traveling at emergency speeds behind one another. When an officer applies the brakes, the rear lights of their patrol vehicle will all turn solid momentarily, which is going to allow that trailing officer to recognize that the officer in front of them is on the brakes, which will hopefully prevent PD vehicle on PD vehicle rear end collisions. And we adjusted our flash pattern to a lower, slower flash pattern once the vehicle is put into park. And then one of the really neat things that we're doing for all of our new vehicles, starting with 2022's vehicle builds, is that we are making sure that our light bars synchronize with one another. So Wayland offers the ability to have your light bars synchronize once on scene. So if 2 or 3 vehicles pull up to one another, after a couple of moments, those light bars are actually communicating with one another and trying to synchronize their flash patterns so that it reduces the chaotic light scenes that we have frequently seen in the past. Here's a couple of quick examples as I start to wrap up the information that I'm sharing with you, but here is what our current response looks like, and when you look at the back, a little bit tough to see, but we've integrated some amber into that. Quick vehicle video of us on the brakes. That is an officer who is on the brakes, and you can see that center is solid for that trailing officer that's following up, give them a visual cue that that person is on the brakes and slowing down. And then lastly, this is what our light bars now look like once you put the vehicle into park, and you go from that quick flashing to something that really starts to slow down. You're still getting the same distance visually picked up by oncoming motorists, but it really starts to slow down. But that really, I know I've kind of talked through that kind of quick. That is a lot of the information that we are doing here in Chesterfield County to try to make sure that we are keeping our officers safe. So I definitely want to thank everybody for bearing with me through the last 25 minutes or so. But again, my contact information is here on the slide if you need it. And my phone numbers are both there, along with my police department email address. And I'll be more than happy to answer questions, or if you want to reach out to me via email or call my office or cell phone number to ask any questions about what we're doing. I'm more than happy to help out where I can.
All right, that was an awesome presentation. And I want to thank you, Captain, for the detail you provided on the lighting, but some of the cool things that you're doing down there in Chesterfield. And that really was an excellent presentation. You got a shout out, by the way. Somebody lives down there and really loves your agency. So you did get a shout out. Somebody did comment that Crown Victoria that I highlighted, that was theirs, and it was a 2007. So it's even older than 12 years old. And yeah, I always comment when I'm in the police museum, we have a Charger on display in the police museum, for those of you who haven't been there. And I don't know how you would, I'm 6'2", and if I'm in handcuffs, I don't know how you get me in that car without cruel and unusual punishment, because you have to fold me in half. And that was another thing the Crown Vics were good for. We did get a question for you, Captain, and I actually, and I'm a little embarrassed to say it, but could you tell us quickly what the Sears project is?
Sure. So the Sears project actually is something that we teach as a result of a tragic vehicle crash that we were involved in. Several years ago, we were in a vehicle pursuit chasing somebody, and we left the county of Chesterfield and went into the city of Colonial Heights, at which time one of our officers, who was traveling at over 100 miles an hour, went through a red light intersection and lost control of a vehicle and struck an off-duty lieutenant with the Colonial Heights Police Department head on and killed him during that crash. So his widow, worked with our agency to come into our department to teach all of our officers about the impacts that crash had on her and her family, and also the impacts that it had on the officer and the officer's family that was involved in it. And we have been teaching that to all of our basic police recruit classes since that occurred. And his widow still comes and talks to our recruits to this day. And I know that she has offered that program to agencies throughout the country, as a matter of fact. So, wow. But it was a tragic event that we realized we needed to learn from, and we have hopefully continued to do so.
Wow, that's excellent. Many people may be familiar, and you may be familiar with Kim Schlau from Below 100. She lost 2 daughters to a law enforcement officer who was speeding, and I think might have actually even been on their phone, and crashed and killed both of her daughters. And she speaks very passionately about it, and it certainly is something that we can all learn from. Somebody had asked about contacting Below 100. I will find out who the latest contact is for Below 100. I've had contact with Dale Stockton, but I'm not sure if Dale's still involved, for those of you who may know him. But I will find out and respond to that as soon as I can. And I think the other questions were just about that. Yeah, just about that. And one thing I will mention, it involves vehicles, and then we'll close out. If any of you get on and watch some of these videos that are out there and are following news, what I do every day is not only am I looking at fatalities, I've started tracking injuries that are reported through all the various little open source media outlets I follow, and there's quite a few. And so this year I've tracked 62 crashes in which officers have been injured. And some of them I track because these may ultimately end up being fatal cases. I know there's one in Alabama I'm looking at where this female officer was knocked out of her boots while on a crash scene. So, but she's still alive and I guess in intensive care. And these, these are the things I follow. But one of the other things I want to mention is the rate at which police vehicles are being stolen on the scenes of usually after the scene has been taken care of. Somebody puts a prisoner in the back of a car or leaves their car running and goes to do something. And the next thing you know, the police vehicle's been stolen. And it seems to me, just through my cursory look of it this year, that's happening more and more. So we just, through our social media, I put out a reminder to make sure your officers are doing what they need to do to secure their vehicles. And there's a couple of fresh videos on YouTube now. One of them is the quote is that your squad? because somebody just jumped in that guy's police car and drove off down the road. And then there's another one from, I can't remember what state, but a prisoner, they put him in the back and he does what prisoners do. He pulled those handcuffs up over his head, stuck his body through that open window in the transport and took off in that patrol car. So just a word of caution. Well, Captain, I want to thank you very much. And I also want to thank my team, Hannah and Anna, for putting this together. And I want to thank all of our participants. And you'll hear more from us later about the next upcoming webinar. But I want to invite anyone who has a good idea on a topic that they want to hear about to please just put it in the email. Send me an email and I'll be happy to focus on that. And as I mentioned, I think next quarter, I think we'd like to hear from the Irving either PD or fire department to talk about their program to help reduce crashes and injuries by having those blocker vehicles that are I guess we'd call them expendable versus a new piece of equipment. So hang on, let me check the Q&A here to make sure I'm not missing anything else. Captain, has your department considered products like digital siren, digital alerting technology that can warn motorists of high-speed pursuits and emergency response? So part of that I can answer. I know Haas Alerts, and I think Haas Alerts has been working with other agencies and vehicle emergency equipment producers to get some connection between the light bar and the alerts and what's going on. So I don't know, are you doing that in Chesterfield, Captain?
We are not integrating that technology as of yet. We are aware that some of it exists, but to be honest, we haven't. We have so many technology projects going on right now with various things that is not something that we have looked extensively at. So it would be something that clearly we'd be interested in looking at to see how viable it would work.
Okay, yeah.
And as long as that could integrate, as long as that could integrate with things like our Chesterfield alert system, things that we do frequently send out to our residents and people in our community about, if active shooters and other, major crimes and stuff like that are in the area. We do send out alerts, mass broadcast alerts and those types of systems. So I'd be curious how it might integrate with those types of things.
Sure. I know that Haas Alerts, again, that came out of the Lithicum Traffic Safety Conference, is looking at greater ways to integrate those alerting systems. Last thing I'll say to everybody, and someone just asked about the contact information. I put my email in there. So if you have a specific question for the captain, I'll just forward you the captain's email. Is that this working group that expanded from our law enforcement summit to then the traffic summit that they have in Lithicum is looking to expand. And it's really important that we're not an echo chamber, right? Because we're all there, we're all interested in it, but we have to get educators, legislators, councilmen, citizens groups, all those people involved in this to create greater awareness about roadside safety. And of course, I'm talking specifically about slow down and move over and us reducing struck by crashes. Again, thank you all for attending. You'll hear more from me also about tire deflation devices. We'll be preparing a report, what form that report comes in. I'm actually thinking about a narrative video report so we can, rather than writing a white paper or something like that, I can actually have something that you can click on and listen to what we found through our analysis and look at some examples of what we think may be, behaviors that we have to change or look at or retrain on. So, Captain, again, thank you. And I want to thank everybody for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. I greatly appreciate the opportunity. And if anyone needs to reach out or has any questions, I'm definitely available.